Sloane Whitaker had learned to make herself invisible. It was a skill she'd perfected over the past 3 months at Lincoln High School, ever since her mother had accepted the teaching position that dragged them from Seattle to this sprawling suburb outside of Denver. She kept her head down in the crowded hallways, her shoulders slightly hunched to minimize her already slight frame, her dark blonde hair falling forward like a curtain between herself and the rest of the world. Most students at Lincoln moved through the corridors in clusters, their laughter echoing off the industrial beige lockers that lined every wall. But Sloane drifted alone, a ghost among the living. The school itself was massive, a sprawling complex of connected buildings that housed over 2,000 students. The main building featured a central atrium with skylights that let in thin Colorado sunshine, surrounded by hallways that branched off like spokes on a wheel. The cafeteria occupied the entire east wing of the ground floor, a cavernous space with industrial-grade tables bolted to the floor and windows that looked out onto the football field where the Lincoln Lions practiced every afternoon. The gymnasium sat in the north building, connected by a glassed-in walkway that students called the Bridge. There was a library on the second floor, quiet and carpeted, with study carrels where Sloane sometimes hid during lunch. The Performing Arts Center jutted from the south side, all modern architecture and acoustic tiles. Outside, there were tennis courts, a track circling the football field, and a student parking lot that seemed to stretch for miles, filled with trucks and hand-me-down sedans and the occasional luxury vehicle that announced its owner's status before they even stepped out. Sloane had arrived at Lincoln in late August with modest hopes for a fresh start. Her previous school in Seattle hadn't been perfect, but she'd had friends there, people who knew her, a comfortable routine. Here she was nobody, and she decided that nobody was exactly what she wanted to be. She dressed in clothes that didn't attract attention, worn jeans, plain t-shirts, an oversized flannel jacket that had belonged to her father. She never raised her hand in class, even when she knew the answer. She ate lunch in different locations each day, rotating between the library, an empty classroom where her mother taught during fifth period, and occasionally a far corner of the cafeteria where the theater kids gathered and ignored outsiders. Her father had died 2 years ago, cancer, sudden and merciless, taking him from diagnosis to gone in 6 months. He'd been a Marine, then a martial arts instructor, running a small gym in their Seattle neighborhood where he taught Brazilian jiu-jitsu to anyone who wanted to learn. Sloane had started training when she was 6, initially just to spend time with her dad, but she'd fallen in love with it, the technical precision, the chess-like strategy, the way size and strength mattered less than timing and leverage. By the time she was 14, she'd earned her blue belt. By 15, her purple. Her father had pushed her hard but fairly, the same way he pushed all his students, and she'd thrived under his instruction. But in his final weeks, when the cancer had stolen his strength and left him hollow-eyed in a hospital bed, he'd made her promise something. His hands had been cold when he gripped hers, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're skilled, Sloane. More skilled than most people will ever be. But I've seen what happens when people with our training forget why we learn it. It's not for aggression. It's not for dominance. Promise me you'll never use it unless you absolutely have to. Promise me you won't become someone who looks for fights." She'd promised through tears, not understanding then what he meant. But in the 2 years since, she'd learned. She'd seen the way some of her father's former students had let their skills make them arrogant, picking fights in bars, getting arrested, throwing away their discipline for momentary ego gratification. Her father had been haunted by his own violent past, incidents from his military service that he'd never fully discussed, bar fights in his 20s before he'd found martial arts as a way to channel his rage. He'd spent the rest of his life trying to be better, teaching control and restraint along with technique. His final wish had been for Sloane to learn from his mistakes rather than repeat them. So when she'd moved to Lincoln High School, she'd made a decision. No one needed to know about her training. She'd left her GI and her belt at the bottom of a box in her closet. She'd stopped attending open mat sessions at the local gym. She'd let her calluses fade and her routines lapse. It felt like betrayal at first, abandoning something her father had given her, but she told herself it was honoring his last wish. She would be normal. She would be nobody. She would find a way forward that didn't involve violence. The first few weeks passed quietly. Teachers learned her name but not her story. Students barely noticed her. She completed her assignments, got decent grades, and counted down the hours until she could go home to the small apartment she shared with her mother, where she could lose herself in books or old movies and pretend that loneliness was the same as peace. The trouble started on a Monday morning in mid-September. Sloane had been at Lincoln for about 3 weeks by then, long enough to understand the school's social hierarchy, but not long enough to have found her place in it. The hallways before first period were always chaotic, students shouting to each other across the corridor, locker doors slamming, the bass-heavy thump of music from someone's portable speaker. Sloane navigated through it with practiced efficiency, her backpack strapped tight to both shoulders, her eyes on the linoleum floor. She didn't see him until she walked directly into him. One moment the path ahead was clear, the next she'd collided with what felt like a brick wall. Her backpack tilted, books spilling onto the floor, and she stumbled backward, barely catching herself against a locker. "Watch where you're going," the brick wall said. She looked up. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of broad-shouldered build that came from hours in the weight room. His hair was dark and styled with too much product, and he wore a Lincoln Lions football jersey with the number 12 on it. His face had the kind of symmetrical good looks that probably opened a lot of doors for him, but his eyes were cold as he looked down at her, his expression somewhere between annoyance and contempt. "Sorry," Sloane muttered, dropping to her knees to gather her scattered books. Her copy of The Great Gatsby had slid halfway down the hall. Her biology notebook had landed face down, its pages bent. The brick wall, she'd later learn his name was Bridger Hawthorne, didn't move. He stood there deliberately blocking her path as she tried to collect her things. When she reached for her English book, he casually kicked it further away, not hard enough to be an obvious assault, but enough to make his point. "You should be more careful," he said, and his friends laughed. There were 3 of them clustered nearby, all wearing similar football jerseys, all watching with the same predatory amusement. Sloane's face burned. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, other students slowing to watch the entertainment. Her hands trembled slightly as she crawled forward to retrieve her book again, and this time Bridger let her take it. She shoved everything into her backpack without caring about the order, her throat tight, her eyes stinging. She stood up without making eye contact with any of them, and walked away as quickly as she could without running, their laughter following her down the hall. It should have been nothing. A minor incident, easily forgotten, but somehow it became something. Over the next few days, she noticed Bridger and his friends everywhere. They sat 3 tables away in the cafeteria, and she could feel their eyes on her. They appeared at her locker between classes, leaning against the wall nearby, making comments just loud enough for her to hear. "There's the hallway zombie," one of them would say. "Bet she's never been to a party in her life. Probably doesn't even know what fun is." She tried ignoring them, but ignoring only seemed to make them more interested. By the end of September, the harassment had settled into a routine. Every morning, Bridger or one of his friends, Tate Garrison and Kyle Hendricks, she'd learned their names from overhearing conversations, would be waiting somewhere along her route to first period. Sometimes they'd just stare. Sometimes they'd make comments about her clothes, her hair, her walk. "Did you get dressed in the dark? Your jacket looks like it survived a fire. Why do you walk like you're trying not to be seen?" She kept her head down and kept moving, but each comment landed like a stone in her stomach. The shoulder bumps started in early October. She'd be walking down the hallway, and suddenly Bridger would be there, slamming his shoulder into hers hard enough to spin her around. "Oops, didn't see you there," he'd say with mock sincerity. His friends would mirror the behavior, creating a gauntlet she had to navigate between classes. Tate was the worst. He'd bump her and then act offended, as if she'd been the one to initiate contact. "Watch it, freak," he'd snarl, and students would scatter to avoid being associated with her. Teachers saw it happening. She knew they did. Mrs. Patterson had witnessed Bridger knock her books out of her hands outside the English classroom. Mr. Chen had been standing right there when Kyle had accidentally stepped on her foot hard enough to make her gasp. But they looked away, pretended not to notice, and kept walking. Maybe they thought teenagers needed to work these things out themselves. Maybe they were too tired to intervene. Maybe they just didn't care about the quiet girl who never caused trouble. By mid-October, Sloane had developed elaborate strategies for avoiding her tormentors. She memorized their schedules, learning which hallways they frequented and which ones were safe. She started arriving at school 15 minutes early to get to her locker and first period before the crowds appeared. She ate lunch in her mother's classroom now, unwilling to risk the cafeteria. On the rare occasions when she couldn't avoid Bridger's group, she made herself even smaller, pressing against the lockers, keeping her eyes down, radiating submission in hopes they'd lose interest. They didn't lose interest. If anything, her obvious fear seemed to encourage them. The weekend between the 3rd and 4th week of October, Sloane lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out what she'd done to deserve this. She'd been nothing but invisible. She'd avoided everyone, bothered no one, given them no reason to single her out. But maybe that was the reason. She was an easy target, someone who wouldn't fight back, whose suffering could be turned into entertainment without consequence. She thought about her father's gym, the heavy bags hanging from chains, the smell of sweat and canvas. She thought about how her body used to move, efficient and controlled, when she drilled techniques. She thought about the confidence that had come from knowing she could defend herself. All of that felt impossibly far away now, buried under her promise and her fear and her desperate need to be normal. On Monday morning, she noticed something different. When she pulled her gym clothes from her locker for 4th period PE, they were soaking wet. Someone had poured water, or something worse, over everything. Her sneakers were ruined, the insoles soggy and beginning to smell. Her t-shirt and shorts clung together in a cold, damp mass. She stood there holding them, water dripping onto the floor, and realized she was about to cry in the middle of the hallway where everyone could see. She didn't cry. She shoved the ruined clothes back into her locker, went to the office, and told them she felt sick. They called her mother, who couldn't leave work but gave permission for Sloane to go home alone. She walked the 1.5 miles to their apartment in the cold October wind, her hands shoved deep in her jacket pockets, her jaw clenched so tight it ached. That night, her mother asked what was wrong. Sloane said nothing was wrong. Her mother looked at her with worried eyes but didn't push. They ate dinner in silence, and afterwards Sloane went to her room and pulled out the box from the bottom of her closet. Her gi was still there, white and worn soft from years of training, her black belt coiled on top. She held it in her hands, running her fingers over the frayed edges where the fabric had started to come apart from hard use. For a moment, she let herself remember what it felt like to be strong. Then she put it away and went to bed. The cafeteria incident happened the next week during 4th lunch period. Sloane had started eating in the cafeteria again because her mother had noticed her coming to the classroom every day and asked questions Sloane didn't want to answer. She'd chosen a table in the far corner near the windows where the theatre kids usually gathered. They ignored her, absorbed in their own dramatic conversations, and she was grateful for their indifference. She'd just sat down with her lunch, a sandwich she'd brought from home, an apple, a bottle of water, when she felt the now familiar prickle of attention on the back of her neck. She didn't turn around. She unwrapped her sandwich with careful movements, her heart rate already accelerating, her peripheral vision tracking movement behind her. Bridger's voice carried across the cafeteria. "Hey, Whitaker, you gonna eat all that yourself?" She didn't respond. She bit into her sandwich, even though her throat had gone tight and swallowing was difficult. Around her, the theatre kids had gone quiet, watching. "I'm talking to you." Closer now. She could smell his cologne, something expensive and overwhelming. "It's rude to ignore people." "Leave me alone," she said quietly, not looking up. "What was that?" "Can't hear you." He was right behind her now. His friends were nearby, their shapes dark in her peripheral vision. The cafeteria had gone quieter, conversations dropping off as people sensed something happening. This was different from the hallway harassment. This was public, performative, meant to be witnessed. "I said, leave me alone." Louder this time, but her voice shook. She hated that it shook. "You know what your problem is?" Bridger leaned down, his mouth close to her ear. "You think you're better than everyone. Walking around with that attitude like we're all beneath you. Someone needs to teach you a lesson. She should have seen it coming. Maybe on some level she did. But when he kicked the leg of her chair, she still wasn't prepared. The chair tipped sideways, too fast for her to catch her balance. She fell, her sandwich flying from her hands, her water bottle bouncing across the floor. She landed hard on her shoulder and hip, pain shooting through both, and for a moment, all she could do was lie there on the cold linoleum while the cafeteria erupted in laughter. "Oops," Bridger said above her. "Guess you should work on your balance." Sloane pushed herself up slowly, her face burning with humiliation so intense it was physical. Her sandwich was on the floor, stepped on by someone's shoe. Her apple had rolled under another table. The water bottle had spilled, creating a puddle that was soaking into her jeans. Around her, students were laughing, pointing, taking out their phones. She could hear the artificial shutter sounds of cameras, knew that in seconds this moment would be on social media, permanent and inescapable. She stood up carefully, her legs shaking, and bent to pick up what she could salvage. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely grip anything. No one helped. The theatre kids had turned away, suddenly fascinated by their own lunches. Other students watched with the blank expressions of people who were glad it wasn't happening to them. She could see teachers on cafeteria duty at the far end of the room, but they were either oblivious or pretending to be. Bridger and his friends walked away laughing, their voices carrying across the cafeteria. "Did you see her face? Bet she's gonna cry." Probably already crying. Their laughter seemed to echo from every surface, bouncing off the industrial tile floor and the high ceiling with its exposed ductwork. Sloane stood there in the middle of the cafeteria, holding the remains of her lunch, water seeping into her shoes, and felt something shift inside her. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a kind of resigned understanding that being invisible hadn't protected her. Being small and quiet and non-threatening hadn't kept her safe. If anything, it had painted a target on her back. There was no level of submission that would satisfy people like Bridger Hawthorne. They didn't want her to disappear. They wanted her to suffer, publicly and repeatedly, because her suffering entertained them. She threw away her ruined lunch and walked out of the cafeteria. She went to the bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and sat on the closed toilet lid until the bell rang for fifth period. When she finally emerged, her eyes were dry but red-rimmed, and she could see in the mirror that everyone would know she'd been crying. She splashed cold water on her face until the worst of it faded, then went to class late with a pass from the nurse. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Between every class, students she'd never spoken to would giggle as she walked past. Someone had shared a video of her falling, and it was making the rounds. She heard snatches of conversation. "Did you see that video of that weird girl? Bridger totally destroyed her. She just laid there like a dead fish." By the end of the day, she felt hollowed out, as if the humiliation had scooped everything vital from inside her and left only a shell. That evening, she sat in the apartment she shared with her mother and stared at the wall. Her mother was at a faculty meeting, wouldn't be home for hours. The silence pressed against Sloane's ears. She thought about tomorrow, about facing another day of this, and couldn't imagine how she'd do it. The video was out there now. Everyone had seen her at her weakest. Even students who'd never noticed her before would recognize her as the girl who got knocked out of a chair, the girl who fell and didn't fight back, the girl who was so pathetic she was funny. She went to her room and opened her laptop, pulling up social media sites she rarely used. The video had been shared across multiple platforms. There were comments underneath, most of them mocking. Mao, she fell like a cartoon character. This is what happens when you're a freak. Bridger Hawthorne is my hero. A few comments suggested people felt bad for her, but those were drowned out by the cruelty. Sloane closed the laptop. She looked at the box in her closet, still slightly open from when she'd looked at her GI last week. She thought about her father, about his final request, about the promise she'd made. Then she thought about walking into Lincoln High School tomorrow and facing another day of this, another week, another month, perhaps the rest of the year. She had no answer. She went to bed early and didn't sleep. Instead, she stared at the ceiling and listened to her mother come home, heard the familiar sounds of their small apartment settling into night, and wondered if there was any path forward that didn't lead to more suffering. The answer came from an unexpected source. His name was Callum Reed, and she'd never spoken to him before, despite having 3 classes together. He sat 2 rows away in European history, directly behind her in chemistry, and across the room in English. She knew his face, but not his story, had catalogued him as one of the invisible ones like herself, quiet, solitary, apparently content to exist in the margins. He found her in the library on Tuesday afternoon. She'd claimed a study carrel in the far corner, her back to the wall so she could see anyone approaching. She was pretending to read The Great Gatsby for English, but the words swam in front of her eyes without meaning. When his shadow fell across her desk, she tensed automatically, preparing for another confrontation. "Hey," he said quietly. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up. He was tall but lean, with dark curly hair that seemed permanently disheveled, and brown eyes that looked genuinely kind. He wore a faded t-shirt for a band she didn't recognize, and jeans with actual holes in them, not the decorative kind that cost extra. His hands were shoved in his pockets, his posture carefully non-threatening. "It's a public library," she said, not quite an invitation but not a rejection either. He sat in the adjacent carrel, angling his chair so he could see her without crowding her space. For a moment he didn't say anything, just sat there with his backpack in his lap, and Sloane felt the uncomfortable weight of his attention. "I saw what happened," he finally said. "Yesterday in the cafeteria. I'm sorry. That was messed up." Sloane's face heated. "Everyone saw." "Yeah." He nodded slowly. "Bridger Hawthorne is a complete asshole. Has been since middle school. I'm sorry you've become his current entertainment." "Why are you telling me this?" She didn't mean to sound hostile, but the words came out sharp. She'd learned not to trust kindness. Sometimes it was just another form of mockery. Callum shrugged. "Because nobody else will. Because everyone's so afraid of becoming his next target that they'll watch him torture someone for months without saying a word. Because I wish someone had said something to me when it was happening to me." That got her attention. "You?" "Last year. Not as bad as what he's doing to you, but bad enough. I got it because I'm on the art track instead of playing sports. He called me a whole bunch of creative slurs, spread rumors about me, generally made my life hell for about 3 months. Callum's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was old pain underneath. "It stopped when he found a new target." I was relieved, but I also felt guilty, you know. Like I'd been saved, but someone else had to suffer in my place. Sloane looked at him more carefully. He met her gaze steadily, not with pity but with understanding. Something tight in her chest loosened slightly. "What did you do?" she asked. "To make it stop?" "Nothing. That's the worst part. I just endured it until he got bored and moved on. I wish I could tell you I stood up to him and he backed down, but that's not what happened. I made myself even smaller than I already was, and eventually I became invisible again." He paused. "I don't know if that's the right strategy for you. You seem like someone who's trying really hard to be invisible, but he's not letting you." "No," Sloane agreed quietly. "He's not." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them, the library hummed with quiet activity. Students typing on laptops, pages turning, the occasional whispered conversation. It was peaceful here, insulated from the chaos of the rest of the school. "I don't know why I came over here," Callum admitted. "I guess I just wanted you to know that not everyone thinks what's happening to you is okay. Most people are cowards, including me most of the time, but that doesn't mean we think you deserve this." "Thanks," Sloane said, and meant it. It was the first genuine kindness anyone at Lincoln had shown her. "I'm Sloane, by the way." "I know. We have 3 classes together." He smiled slightly. "I'm Callum. And I know you know that because I heard Mrs. Patterson call on me in history about 50 times. Despite everything, Sloane felt her mouth twitch into something almost like a smile. "She really loves the Napoleonic Wars. She really does." Callum stood up, shouldering his backpack. "Listen, I know you probably want to be alone, but if you ever want to eat lunch with someone who isn't going to knock your chair over, I'm usually in the art room during 4th lunch. It's technically against the rules, but Mr. Desmond doesn't care as long as we clean up after ourselves." "I'll think about it," Sloane said, which they both knew meant no. Fair enough. He started to walk away, then paused and turned back. For what it's worth, the video made Bridger look like a bully, not you like a victim. Anyone with half a brain can see he's the problem, not you. After he left, Sloane sat in her carrel for a long time, thinking. She didn't believe him about the video. Her humiliation had been too complete, too public. But his kindness had been real, and that was something. It was more than she'd had yesterday. Over the next week, the harassment continued. Bridger and his friends had been emboldened by the cafeteria incident, their confidence boosted by the lack of consequences. They no longer bothered with subtlety. They would block her path in the hallways, forcing her to squeeze past them while they made lewd comments. They threw things at her in the cafeteria, wadded up napkins, food wrappers, once a half-eaten apple that hit her in the back of the head. They started a rumor that she smelled bad, and students began holding their noses when she walked past. Teachers continued to look away. When she'd finally worked up the courage to report one incident to Mr. Chen, he'd sighed and said, "High school is tough. Kids can be mean. My advice is to develop thicker skin." When she'd tried to show a video of Bridger deliberately tripping her in the hallway to Vice Principal Morrison, he'd watched it with an impassive expression and said, "I don't see anything definitive here. Could be an accident. Try to avoid them if they're bothering you." The message was clear. She was on her own. The adults who were supposed to protect students from exactly this kind of behavior had decided it was easier to look away. Bridger's father was some kind of important donor to the athletics program, she'd heard, and Bridger himself was the star running back on a football team that was having its best season in years. Nobody wanted to rock that boat over some quiet girl who didn't matter. Sloane started eating lunch in the library again, despite knowing her mother would disapprove if she found out. The library was safe, quiet, and Ms. Kowalski, the librarian, seemed genuinely committed to maintaining it as a harassment-free zone. When Tate Garrison had tried to follow Sloane in one day, Ms. Kowalski had kicked him out, with a firmness that suggested she saw through the whole situation. On a Friday afternoon in early November, Callum found her in the library again. She'd been avoiding him since their first conversation, not because she didn't appreciate what he'd done, but because she'd learned that association with her made people targets too. She didn't want to drag anyone else into her nightmare. "You've been avoiding me," he said, sitting down without asking this time. "I'm going to choose to believe it's not because you hate me." "I don't hate you." Sloane closed her book. She was reading it for real this time, grateful for the escape into another world. "I just don't want to get you in trouble." Too late. Bridger already knows we talked. He said something charming to me about fraternizing with freaks yesterday. Callum's tone was light, but his jaw was tight. "So, since I'm already on his radar, you might as well let me eat lunch with you, unless you really prefer solitude." Sloane looked at him for a long moment. He looked back, patient and genuine. She realized she was lonely, profoundly lonely, and that his offer of companionship was something she desperately wanted, even if she shouldn't take it. "Okay," she said quietly, "but if it gets bad, you should distance yourself." "I mean it." Noted and ignored. He pulled out his own lunch, a paper bag with a sandwich and chips. "So, Gatsby, what do you think? Is he a romantic hero or a delusional stalker?" And just like that, they were friends. It happened so naturally that Sloane barely noticed the transition. They started eating lunch together in the library most days. Callum was easy to talk to, funny in a dry way that caught her off guard and made her laugh when she'd thought she'd forgotten how. He was genuinely passionate about art, painting specifically, though he worked in other mediums too. He showed her photos of his work on his phone, abstract pieces full of color and movement that she didn't fully understand, but could appreciate for their raw emotion. "I'm not trying to make something pretty," he explained one day. "I'm trying to make something that feels true. Like this piece." He showed her a canvas covered in sharp angles and dark reds. "This was after my dad left. I was angry, you know, so that's anger. Not what anger looks like, but what it feels like." "It's intense," Sloane said, studying the image. "In a good way. It makes me feel something, even though I don't know what that something is. That's all I can ask for." He put his phone away. "What about you? What are you into besides keeping your head down and surviving?" She almost told him then, almost said, "I used to train in martial arts. I used to be strong. I used to know how to defend myself." But the words stuck in her throat, blocked by her promise and her fear, and 2 years of keeping that part of herself hidden. "Books," she said instead. "I like reading. It's an escape, I guess. Nothing wrong with that. We all need escapes." He bit into his sandwich, thoughtful. "Although at some point we have to come back to reality." What if reality sucks? The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. Callum considered this seriously. "Then I guess we have 2 choices. Keep escaping or change reality, both valid depending on the situation." Their friendship shifted something in Sloane's daily experience at Lincoln. The harassment didn't stop. If anything, it intensified as Bridger noticed she'd found an ally. But having someone to talk to made it more bearable. Callum walked with her between classes when their schedules aligned. He texted her in the evenings stupid jokes and memes that made her smile. He gave her his number and told her to call if things got really bad, an offer she appreciated even though she knew she'd never take him up on it. But Callum's presence also made her a more visible target, and worse, it made him a target too. One Monday morning in mid-November, she arrived at school to find his locker had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted "Freak Lover" across it in red letters that looked like they were dripping blood. Callum stood in front of it with his arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Subtle," he said when he saw her approaching. "Real subtle." "Callum, I'm so sorry." "Don't." He cut her off, his voice sharp. Don't apologize for this. You didn't do it. Bridger did, or one of his trained monkeys. This is on them, not you. But it's because of me. It's because of them, Callum insisted. They're bullies. This is what bullies do. They find vulnerable people and they attack them. If it wasn't you, it would be someone else. If it wasn't me defending you, they'd find another reason to target me. He turned to face her fully. I don't regret being your friend, Sloane. Don't insult me by suggesting I should. Her eyes stung. She blinked rapidly, refusing to cry in the hallway where everyone could see. Okay. He pulled out his phone. I'm documenting this, taking pictures. When they graduate and try to get into college or get jobs, and someone Googles their names, maybe this will show up. Maybe there will be some consequence eventually, even if there isn't one now. The vandalism was reported, photographed by Vice Principal Morrison, and then painted over by the custodial staff. No investigation was launched. No one was questioned. The locker simply reappeared the next day in its original beige color, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Sloane felt a shift in the atmosphere at school, a heightened tension that suggested things were escalating. Bridger's harassment became more aggressive, more personal. He started making comments about her body, speculating loudly about her sexual experience, or lack thereof, suggesting graphic things she should do to earn his approval. His friends joined in, creating a chorus of degradation that followed her through the hallways. Callum received similar treatment. They called him her boyfriend, with sneering emphasis, made crude comments about what they probably did together, spread rumors that grew increasingly ugly. Sloane watched him endure it with a stoicism that matched her own, saw the way his jaw would clench and his fists would tighten, but he never rose to the bait. "Why don't you fight back?" she asked him one day in the library. They'd both just suffered through a particularly brutal hallway gauntlet where Bridger's entire group had surrounded them and made them run a verbal obstacle course of insults and threats. "Fight back how?" Callum asked. "If I punch Bridger, I get expelled. He's untouchable. His dad donates tens of thousands to this school every year. I'm nobody, same as you." "We're not nobody," Sloane said, but the words felt hollow. "We are here, at Lincoln, in their world." He looked at her with weary eyes. "The only way to win is to survive until we get out. Graduate, go to college, build lives somewhere else. That's the end game. That's a long time to endure this." "Yeah," Callum agreed. "It really is." As November progressed, Sloane found herself thinking more and more about the box in her closet. At night, she would lie in bed and imagine what would happen if she stopped hiding, if she let them see what she was capable of. The fantasies were detailed and visceral. She imagined Bridger pushing her in the hallway and her responding with a perfectly executed hip throw that would send him crashing to the ground. She imagined him reaching for her and her catching his wrist, applying just enough pressure to make him gasp, forcing him to his knees. She imagined the shocked expressions on everyone's faces, the sudden respect, the end of her torment. But then she would think about her father's face in that hospital bed, the way his eyes had pleaded with her. She would remember her promise. She would think about the kind of person who responded to cruelty with violence and wonder if stopping them once would be enough, or if it would open a door that could never be closed. She didn't have an answer, so she continued to endure. Thanksgiving break came as a mercy. 5 days away from Lincoln, from Bridger, from the constant vigilance required to navigate hostile territory. Sloane spent the holiday with her mother, just the two of them in their small apartment, eating a modest turkey and watching old movies. Her mother knew something was wrong, but seemed afraid to push too hard, perhaps worried what she might find if she dug too deep. "How's school?" her mother asked over dinner. "You seem stressed." "It's fine," Sloane lied, "just adjusting." "Made any friends?" "One, Callum. He's nice, Her mother brightened at this. "That's wonderful, honey. You should invite him over sometime." Sloane nodded vaguely, knowing she never would. The apartment was too small, too shabby, too revealing of how little they had, and besides, she didn't want to pull Callum any deeper into her life than he already was. When break ended and she returned to Lincoln, she felt the dread settle back over her like a familiar weight. The hallways looked the same, smelled the same, echoed with the same chaos. She found Callum at his locker before first period, and they exchanged weary smiles, two soldiers returning to a war they couldn't win. "Survived the holiday?" he asked. "Barely. You?" "My mom tried to get me to explain why I've been so moody lately. I told her it was just teenage angst. She seemed relieved it wasn't drugs." He closed his locker. "Ready for another day in paradise?" They weren't ready. Nobody could be ready for what Bridger had planned. It happened during fourth lunch on the Monday after Thanksgiving break. The cafeteria was packed, every table full, the noise level deafening as usual. Sloane and Callum had gotten their food. She'd reluctantly started eating in the cafeteria again because the library was closed during lunch for inventory, and found seats at a table near the windows. Other students sat nearby, but not with them, maintaining the social distance that marked them as untouchables. They were halfway through their meal, discussing the essay due in English on Friday, when Sloane felt the familiar prickle of attention. She looked up and saw Bridger approaching with his full entourage. Tate was on his left, Kyle on his right, and three other football players she recognized but couldn't name flanked them. They walked with the swagger of people who owned the space, and the crowd parted for them automatically. "Well, well," Bridger said loudly, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Look who decided to show their faces, the freak and her boyfriend." The cafeteria didn't go completely silent. It was too large for that, but conversations dropped off in their immediate vicinity. Phones came out. This was entertainment, a show about to begin. "Leave us alone, Bridger," Callum said, his voice steady but quiet. "We're just trying to eat lunch. See, that's your problem. You think you get to make demands. You think you matter." Bridger leaned down, his hands on their table, bringing his face level with theirs. "But you don't. You're nothing. You're less than nothing, and every day you walk through this school like you have a right to be here, you're taking up space that belongs to people who actually matter." Sloane kept her eyes on her lunch tray, her heart hammering. She could feel the attention of hundreds of students, could sense the phones recording every second. This was going to be bad. She knew it with a certainty that made her stomach clench. "We're not bothering anyone," she said quietly. "Please just leave us alone. Please," Bridger mimicked in a high-pitched voice. "Please leave us alone. You hear that, guys?" She said please. Like that means something. He straightened up, looking around at his audience, playing to them. "You know what I think? I think someone needs to teach both of you a lesson about where you stand in the social order around here." Before either of them could react, Bridger reached out and grabbed Sloane's lunch tray. In one swift motion, he dumped the contents into her lap. Spaghetti and sauce, chocolate milk, a soggy salad, all of it landed on her jeans and shirt, hot and wet and utterly humiliating. Around them, students gasped and laughed and recorded every second. Sloane sat frozen, sauce dripping down her legs, noodles sliding onto the floor. Her face burned with a humiliation so intense it was physical pain. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what had just happened. Next to her, Callum started to stand up, his face flushed with anger. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Tate shoved him back into his seat hard enough that the chair scraped across the floor. "Sit down, freak. Your turn's coming." Bridger wasn't done. He grabbed Callum's tray next and dumped it, but this time over Callum's head. Food slid down his hair, his face, his shirt. Milk dripped from his chin. For a moment Callum sat there in shock, hands slightly raised, covered in his own lunch, while the cafeteria erupted in laughter and cheers. That's when something inside Sloane cracked, not broke, cracked. A hairline fracture in the wall she'd built around herself, the dam she'd constructed to hold back the part of her that her father had trained, the skills she'd promised to keep hidden. She looked at Callum's face, saw his expression, not just humiliated but defeated, broken in a way she'd never seen him before, and felt rage unlike anything she'd experienced since her father's death. She stood up slowly, food sliding off her lap onto the floor. Bridger turned to her, a grin on his face, expecting more submission, more entertainment. What he saw in her expression made his grin falter slightly. "You're going to regret that," Sloane said. Her voice was low, but it carried in the sudden quiet that had fallen over their section of the cafeteria. Bridger recovered his confidence quickly, laughing. "Oh yeah? What are you going to do, freak? Cry? Run to Mummy? Tell a teacher who won't do anything?" Sloane took a step toward him. Her posture had changed without her consciously deciding to change it. Shoulders back, weight centered, balance perfect. Her hands hung loose at her sides, relaxed but ready. "No," she said calmly. "I'm going to make sure you understand there are consequences for your actions." "Is that a threat?" Bridger looked delighted. This was even better than he'd hoped for. "Did everyone hear that? The freak just threatened me. That's not very smart." "It's not a threat." Sloane's voice was steady, almost conversational. "It's a fact. You've been tormenting me for months. You've escalated from words to vandalism to physical harassment. Today you assaulted me and my friend with food. You did it publicly, in front of hundreds of witnesses, and you did it because you thought there would be no consequences." She paused, aware of every eye in the cafeteria on her, every phone recording. "You were wrong." Tate laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Listen to her. Like she's gonna do something. What are you gonna do? Fight us? All of us?" "If necessary." Sloane's eyes never left Bridger's face. "But I'm really just interested in you, Bridger. You're the one who needs to learn this lesson." For a second, just a second, something flickered in Bridger's expression that might have been uncertainty. But he was surrounded by his friends, by his audience, by hundreds of students watching. He couldn't back down now without losing everything. "You're insane," he said, but he took a step toward her, his body language shifting into aggression. "You know what? Fine. Let's do this. Let's see what the little freak can actually do." He reached for her, fast and hard, clearly intending to shove her backward the way he'd shoved Callum into his seat. It was a dominant move, meant to establish physical superiority, meant to make her stumble and fall and look weak. It didn't work. The instant his hands came toward her, Sloane's body reacted with muscle memory built over years of training. She stepped offline smoothly, her feet moving in a pattern she'd drilled thousands of times, and Bridger's shove met empty air. His momentum carried him forward, off balance, and she could have taken him down right then. Could have swept his legs, could have guided him to the floor, could have put him in a dozen positions where he'd be helpless. But she didn't. Not yet. She stepped back, reset her stance, and waited. The cafeteria was completely silent now. Even students at the far tables had stopped eating to watch. Teachers were moving toward them, but slowly, uncertain what they were seeing. Bridger recovered his balance and spun to face her, his face flushed. "Lucky dodge," he said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "Let's see you do that again." He came at her again, this time with a wild punch aimed at her face. It was a terrible punch, arm extended too far, shoulder leading, feet planted wrong, the kind of punch someone throws when they've never been taught proper technique. Sloane saw it coming from a mile away. She slipped it easily, her head moving just enough to let his fist pass by her ear, and as his arm extended, she grabbed his wrist with both hands. The movement was automatic, reflexive. Her left hand secured his wrist, her right hand controlled his elbow, and she stepped in close, rotating her hips. It was a basic standing armbar, something she'd learned in her first year of training. Applied with full force, it could hyperextend the elbow, cause serious injury. She had no intention of doing that. She just needed to make a point. She applied pressure slowly, carefully, just enough that Bridger had to go up on his toes to relieve the strain on his joint. His eyes went wide with shock and pain. "Stop," he said. It came out strangled. Sloane held him there for 3 seconds. 3 seconds where every student in the cafeteria could see Bridger Hawthorne, star running back, king of Lincoln High School, completely controlled by the girl he'd been tormenting for months. 3 seconds where his power was revealed as an illusion, where his dominance was shown to be nothing but social privilege without substance. Then she let go and stepped back. Bridger stumbled, clutching his arm, his face a mixture of shock and rage. "What the hell are you?" he gasped. "Someone you should have left alone!" Sloane's voice was calm, but her heart was racing. The crack in her control was widening. 2 years of suppressed training, suppressed confidence, suppressed strength, all of it threatening to flood out now that she'd allowed even a drop through. Tate and Kyle moved in, flanking her. "You're dead," Tate growled. "You can't fight all of us." "She won't have to." Callum's voice from behind her. She glanced back and saw him standing, food still dripping from his hair, his hands clenched into fists. He was terrified. She could see it in his eyes, but he was standing with her anyway. "Back off." "Shut up, Callum," Kyle said, but his attention was on Sloane. They were all looking at her differently now, calculating, trying to reassess someone they'd thought they understood. Bridger recovered some of his composure, though he kept one hand on his arm where she'd controlled him. "You're going to regret that," he said. "You put your hands on me. That's assault. You're going to get expelled." "There are about 200 witnesses," Sloane said evenly. "They all saw you dump food on me first. They all saw you attempt to hit me. They all saw me defend myself without hurting you." She gestured around the cafeteria, and half of them recorded it. "So go ahead, Bridger, report me. Let's see how that works out for you." For a moment the standoff hung in balance. Bridger looked around, seemed to realize that she was right. The phones that had been recording his planned humiliation had instead captured his defeat. His face darkened with rage. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is." Sloane's voice was firm. "It's over right now. You're going to leave me alone. You're going to leave Callum alone. You're going to walk away, and we're going to pretend this never happened. Or what? Or next time I won't be so gentle." She met his eyes steadily. "That armbar I just showed you? I could have broken your elbow. Instead, I let you go. That won't happen twice." Teachers were arriving now, pushing through the crowd. Vice Principal Morrison led them, his face red with exertion. "What's going on here?" "What happened?" 20 voices tried to answer at once. Students shouted over each other, some trying to defend Bridger, others eagerly recounting his humiliation. Sloane stood quietly in the center of it all, food stains covering her clothes, her heart still racing, but her breathing controlled. Morrison held up his hands for silence. "One at a time. Someone tell me what happened." "She attacked me," Bridger said immediately, cradling his arm. "She assaulted me for no reason." "That's not what happened," Callum said loudly. "He dumped food on both of us first. Then he tried to hit her. She was defending herself." "That's what I saw too," said a voice from the crowd. A girl Sloane didn't know, someone from the theater table. "Bridger started it. She just defended herself." "I have it on video," another student called out, holding up his phone. "Want to see?" Morrison's expression suggested he very much did not want to see. He looked between Bridger and Sloane, seeming to calculate which problem would cause him more trouble. "All of you, with me, now. We're going to sort this out in my office." They were marched out of the cafeteria like prisoners of war. Sloane and Callum in front, still covered in food, Bridger and his friends following behind. The cafeteria erupted in conversation behind them, but Sloane barely heard it. She was thinking about her promise to her father, about the line she'd just crossed, about what came next. In Morrison's office, they all stood in a line while he sat behind his desk and rubbed his temples as if warding off a migraine. "I don't suppose any of you want to tell me the truth," he said wearily. "I'll tell you the truth." Sloane stepped forward slightly. She was still covered in spaghetti sauce, still sticky with milk, but she held herself straight. "Bridger Hawthorne has been bullying me since September. He's harassed me in the hallways, vandalized my property, spread rumors about me, and made my life miserable. Today, he escalated to physical assault when he dumped food on me and my friend. When he attempted to strike me, I defended myself using the minimum force necessary. I'm happy to show you the videos that multiple students recorded, which will confirm everything I just said." Morrison's eyes flicked to Bridger. "Is this true?" "She's lying," Bridger said immediately. "I barely even know her. We were just joking around and she freaked out." "Show him the videos," Callum said to Morrison. "Just watch the videos. They'll show exactly what happened." Morrison looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "I'll need to review the evidence, speak to witnesses, and determine appropriate consequences. In the meantime, you're all suspended pending investigation." "All of us?" Sloane couldn't keep the disbelief from her voice. "He assaulted me and I'm being suspended." "Zero tolerance policy for violence," Morrison said, not meeting her eyes. "You put your hands on another student. Until I determine it was justified self-defense, you're suspended." "This is bullshit," Callum said. "You're punishing her for defending herself because it's easier than dealing with the actual problem. Watch your language, Mr. Reed, or your suspension will be longer." Morrison picked up his phone. "I'm calling all your parents. You'll wait in separate rooms until they arrive to pick you up." They were separated. Sloane to an empty classroom, Callum to another, Bridger and his friends to a third. Sloane sat at a desk and stared at the wall, her mind strangely blank. She'd done it. She'd broken her promise. She'd used her training, revealed her skills, responded to violence with technique, everything her father had asked her not to do. But she didn't feel guilty. She felt relieved. The constant fear, the perpetual vigilance, the exhausting effort of making herself small, all of it had lifted the moment she'd stepped into that armbar. For the first time in months, she felt like herself. Her mother arrived an hour later, her face pale with worry. "Sloane, what happened? They said you were in a fight." "Not a fight." Sloane stood up. "Self-defense. Can we go home? I'll explain everything." In the car, she told her mother the whole story. Everything. The months of harassment, the escalation, the food incident, the moment when she'd finally stood up for herself. Her mother listened in silence, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her expression shifting from confusion to anger to something that might have been guilt. "Why didn't you tell me?" her mother asked quietly. "I knew something was wrong, but I didn't realize it was this bad. I didn't want to worry you, and I didn't think it would help." Sloane looked out the window at the passing streets. "The teachers don't care, Mom. The administration doesn't care. They've seen it happening, and they've done nothing. I was on my own. You shouldn't have been." Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "You're my daughter. I should have protected you. You couldn't. You're a teacher there. If you'd tried to intervene, they could have made things difficult for you. I knew that." Sloane turned to face her mother. "I had to handle it myself. By using your martial arts training." "Sloane, you promised your father." "I know what I promised." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I know, Mom. And I tried. I tried so hard to keep that promise. I let them harass me for months. I stayed quiet and small and invisible, just like I thought he wanted. But you know what? Dad's not here. He didn't have to walk those hallways. He didn't have to endure what I endured. and I don't think he would have wanted me to just accept being victimized forever." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. "You're right. He wouldn't have wanted that. Your father's last wish was for you not to become someone who looked for fights, who used violence as a first resort, but defending yourself, standing up to someone who was hurting you. He would have understood that." She pulled into their apartment parking lot and turned off the car. "I'm proud of you, Sloane. I'm angry that you had to handle this alone, but I'm proud that you stood up for yourself." The suspension lasted 3 days. During that time, Sloane's phone exploded with messages. Most were from numbers she didn't recognize. Students at Lincoln who'd seen the videos, who wanted to tell her she was brave or cool or a badass. Some wanted to know where she'd learned to fight. Others shared their own stories of being bullied by Bridger or his friends. Callum texted her constantly. His suspension had been lifted after one day, once his mother had raised hell with the administration and threatened legal action. Apparently, having food dumped on you and then standing nearby while someone else defended themselves didn't constitute violence, even under zero-tolerance policies. "Everyone's talking about you," he texted. "You're like a legend. Half the school is scared of you, the other half wants to be your friend. It's wild." "What about Bridger?" she texted back. "Haven't seen him. Rumor is his suspension is longer. Something about the videos showing him starting it. Also, his dad is apparently furious, but not at the school, at Bridger for getting humiliated." On the 3rd day of her suspension, Vice Principal Morrison called. "Miss Whitaker, I've completed my investigation. After reviewing the video evidence and speaking with witnesses, I've determined that you acted in self-defense. Your suspension is lifted. You can return to school tomorrow." "What about Bridger?" Sloane asked. "Mr. Hawthorne will be suspended for the remainder of the week and will face additional consequences upon his return, including mandatory counseling and removal from the football team for the rest of the season. His behavior was unacceptable, and the administration takes bullying very seriously." Sloane almost laughed at that. They'd taken it so seriously they'd ignored it for months. But she bit back the sarcasm. "Thank you. Miss Whitaker, I also wanted to apologize. Several students and teachers have come forward since the incident to report the ongoing harassment you experienced. I should have been more attentive to the situation. I'm sorry. It was something, she supposed. Not enough, but something. Okay. We'll see you tomorrow. And Miss Whitaker, if you experience any further problems, my door is open." She hung up and sat on her bed, processing. Tomorrow she'd go back to Lincoln High School, but as someone completely different from who she'd been when she left. Everyone would know what she could do. The invisibility she'd worked so hard to maintain was gone forever. Surprisingly, she didn't mind. Being invisible had been exhausting. Maybe being seen would be easier. She returned to school on a Friday morning, feeling like she was walking into a different building. The hallways looked the same, but the energy was different. Students noticed her immediately. Conversations stopped as she passed. People stepped aside, giving her space. Some looked at her with respect, others with fear, many with curiosity. Callum was waiting at her locker, grinning. The conquering hero returns. Shut up. But she was smiling too. Is it going to be like this all day? Probably. You're the most interesting thing to happen at Lincoln in years. He fell into step beside her as they walked toward first period. I've been fielding questions about you constantly. Everyone wants to know your story, where you learned to fight, why you kept it secret. If you're actually some kind of secret agent, what did you tell them? That you're a private person and they should mind their own business. He glanced at her. But if you wanted to tell me, I'd be interested too. She considered this. Callum had stood with her when it mattered. He'd risked his own safety to support her. He deserved some honesty. My father was a Marine and then a martial arts instructor. He taught me Brazilian jiu-jitsu from the time I was 6. Before he died, he made me promise not to use it unless I absolutely had to. I was trying to honor that promise. Until you had to, Callum said quietly. Until I had to, she agreed. They reached her first period class, European history with Mrs. Patterson. Sloane took her usual seat and waited for the teacher's reaction. Mrs. Patterson looked at her with an expression that might have been guilt. "Welcome back, Miss Whittaker," she said quietly. "I'm glad you're okay." The day passed in a strange blur. In every class, she felt the weight of attention, the curious stares, the whispered conversations. Teachers treated her differently, more respectfully, but also with a kind of caution, as if they weren't sure how to handle her now. Students who'd never spoken to her before tried to start conversations in the hallways. Some wanted to be her friend. Others wanted to share their own stories of being victimized by Bridger or others. At lunch, she and Callum sat at their usual table near the windows. This time, however, they weren't alone. 3 other students asked to join them. The girl from the theatre table who'd spoken up for Sloane in Morrison's office, and 2 students Sloane had never spoken to before, but who apparently felt safer sitting with her than sitting alone. "Is this okay?" the theatre girl asked. She was small, with curly red hair and nervous eyes. "We don't have to sit here if you want to be alone." "It's fine," Sloane said, and meant it. The table felt different with other people at it, more normal, less like a quarantine zone. "I'm Darcy," the girl offered. "I just wanted to say thank you for what you did. Bridger and his friends have made my life hell too, but I was too scared to do anything about it. Seeing you stand up to him, it meant something." "I didn't do it for anyone else," Sloane said honestly. "I just reached my breaking point." "Still counts," Darcy said with a small smile. Bridger returned to school the following Monday. Sloane saw him in the hallway before first period, surrounded by his friends, but notably quieter than usual. When their eyes met across the corridor, he looked away first. The power dynamic had shifted completely. He was no longer the predator, and she was no longer the prey. The entire school had seen him defeated, seen his power revealed as hollow, and that humiliation couldn't be undone. For the next few days, an uneasy peace held. Bridger and his friends avoided Sloane and Callum completely, taking different routes through the building, eating at different times. There were no more comments, no more harassment, no more casual cruelty. It was as if they'd collectively decided she didn't exist. Sloane should have been relieved. Instead, she felt unsettled. Bridger Hawthorne wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. He was plotting something. She could feel it in the way he watched her from across the cafeteria, in the way his friends would huddle together and go silent when she passed. Something was coming. It came on a Friday afternoon in early December. Sloane and Callum were walking to the parking lot after school, discussing their plans for the weekend, when Bridger appeared from behind a row of cars. He wasn't alone. Tate, Kyle, and the rest of his usual group flanked him, plus a few students Sloane didn't recognize. Maybe a dozen people in total blocking their path. "We need to talk," Bridger said. His voice was steady, but there was something desperate in his eyes. "We don't have anything to talk about," Sloane replied, her body automatically shifting into a defensive posture. Callum moved closer to her side. "Yes, we do." Bridger took a step forward. "You humiliated me. You made me look weak in front of the entire school. You destroyed my reputation, and you think you're just going to walk away from that?" "You humiliated yourself," Sloane said calmly. "You bullied me for months. You assaulted me with food in front of hundreds of witnesses. All I did was defend myself. Everything that happened to you after that was consequence, not revenge. I don't care about your excuses." Bridger's face was flushed now, anger breaking through his attempted composure. "You need to learn your place. And since you won't learn it peacefully, we're going to have to teach you." Callum pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police." Tate moved forward and snatched the phone from his hand, throwing it across the parking lot where it shattered against asphalt. "No, you're not." They were surrounded now, the circle of Bridger's followers tightening. Sloane assessed the situation with the tactical awareness her father had trained into her. 12 against 2. Most of them looked uncertain, following Bridger out of habit rather than genuine commitment. But Bridger, Tate and Kyle looked serious. This wasn't going to end with words. "Last chance," Sloane said, addressing Bridger directly. "Walk away now. Don't make this worse than it already is." "Worse for who?" Bridger sneered. He nodded to Tate and Kyle. "Take her!" They came at her together, one from each side, clearly planning to grab her arms and immobilize her. It might have worked if she'd been a normal person, someone without training, but she wasn't. Sloane exploded into motion. She dropped her backpack and stepped into Tate's charge, using his momentum against him. She grabbed his reaching arm, pivoted, and threw him with a basic hip toss that sent him crashing onto the hood of someone's parked car. The alarm went off, a blaring sound that echoed across the parking lot. Kyle hesitated, seeing his friend go down so easily. That hesitation was all Sloane needed. She closed the distance between them and swept his legs, dropping him to the asphalt. He landed hard on his back, the wind knocked out of him. 2 down in less than 5 seconds. The circle of followers backed up, suddenly uncertain. This wasn't going the way Bridger had promised them it would. "Anyone else?" Sloane asked, breathing steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Or are we done here?" Bridger's face had gone pale, then red, then pale again. He looked at his fallen friends, at the uncertain faces of his followers, and seemed to realize that he was watching his social empire crumble in real time. Every second he stood there, without acting, confirmed his weakness. Every second she remained standing confirmed her strength. He charged her with a roar, throwing wild punches that looked more like a windmill than any kind of coherent attack. Sloane slipped and parried, staying just out of range, not countering. She didn't want to hurt him. She wanted him to exhaust himself, to look foolish, to understand viscerally that violence wasn't going to solve his problems. After about 10 seconds of failing to land a single strike, Bridger stopped, breathing hard. "Fight back!" he screamed at her. "Fight back, damn it!" "No," Sloane said calmly. "I'm not going to give you an excuse to claim I attacked you. You came after me. You brought your friends to intimidate me. None of it worked. That's on you." Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone, probably a teacher or student from inside the school, had called the authorities. Bridger's followers started to scatter, not wanting to be there when the police arrived. Within seconds, only Bridger, Tate, still groaning on the car hood, Kyle, sitting up but not standing, Sloane and Callum remained. "This isn't over," Bridger said, but his voice was hollow now, the threat empty. "Yes, it is," Sloane replied. "It's been over since the moment I stopped being afraid of you. You just haven't accepted it yet." The police arrived, along with Vice Principal Morrison and several teachers. There were statements to take, witnesses to interview, parents to call. Sloane explained what happened with the same calm clarity she'd used in Morrison's office. Callum corroborated her story. Security cameras in the parking lot had caught most of the incident. Once again, the evidence supported her version of events completely. This time, the consequences for Bridger were more severe. Expulsion was discussed, but ultimately rejected due to his father's influence and the team of lawyers his family immediately hired. Instead, he was suspended for the remainder of the semester, banned from all school activities and athletics indefinitely, and ordered to undergo extensive counseling. Tate and Kyle received similar punishments. The other students who'd participated in the parking lot confrontation were suspended for varying lengths of time. Sloane and Callum were cleared completely. Morrison even issued what passed for an apology to Sloane in front of the police officers, acknowledging that she'd acted in self-defense and that the school should have intervened in the bullying situation months earlier. But perhaps the most significant consequence wasn't official, it was social. By Monday morning, everyone at Lincoln High School had heard about the parking lot incident. The story had grown in the telling. Some versions had Sloane taking on 20 people, others had Bridger crying and begging for mercy. The truth was dramatic enough without embellishment, but teenage gossip didn't care about accuracy. What mattered was the narrative. Bridger Hawthorne, Lincoln's golden boy, had been utterly defeated by a girl he'd bullied, twice. The first time in the cafeteria, the second time in the parking lot. His reputation was destroyed, his social power was gone, and Sloane, who'd arrived at Lincoln as nobody, had somehow become someone. The dynamic at school shifted dramatically. Students who'd avoided her now sought her out. The table in the cafeteria where she and Callum sat became crowded with others. Students who'd been victims themselves, students who admired what she'd done, students who just wanted to be associated with someone who had that kind of courage. Sloane didn't particularly want the attention, but she accepted it with grace, understanding that she'd become a symbol of something larger than herself. Teachers treated her differently too, some with respect, some with wariness, but all of them seemed to actually see her now in a way they hadn't before. Mrs. Patterson pulled her aside after history class one day and said simply, "I'm sorry. I should have done something earlier. I knew what was happening and I looked away. That was wrong." Sloane appreciated the apology, even if it couldn't change the past. "Thank you," she said. "That means something." As December progressed and winter break approached, life at Lincoln settled into a new normal. Bridger returned after his suspension, but he was a different person, or at least he presented himself differently. He kept his head down, avoided confrontation, and generally tried to be invisible in the way Sloane once had. His former friends had largely abandoned him, not willing to be associated with someone who'd fallen so far from grace. Sloane saw him sometimes in the hallways and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also something that might have been pity. He'd been a bully and a coward, and he'd deserved consequences for his actions. But watching him navigate Lincoln as a social pariah, she understood how crushing that isolation was because she'd lived it herself. One afternoon in mid-December, she found him sitting alone in the cafeteria at a table in the corner, the same corner where she used to sit, ironically. Everyone was avoiding him, giving him the same wide berth they'd once given her. She watched him for a moment, eating his lunch with mechanical movements, his eyes on his food, and made a decision. She walked over to his table. He saw her approaching and tensed, his expression guarded. "Can I sit?" she asked. Bridger looked confused and suspicious. "Why?" "Because I want to talk to you." She sat down without waiting for permission. "How are you doing? How do you think?" His voice was bitter. "I'm a joke. Everyone hates me. My dad won't even look at me. My friends abandoned me. I'm exactly where you used to be, except worse, because everyone knows I deserve it." "You did deserve consequences," Sloane said honestly. "What you did to me, to Callum, to however many other people over the years, that was cruel and wrong. You hurt people because you could, and you never thought about what that hurt felt like from the other side." "I know." He said it quietly, not looking at her. "I've had a lot of time to think about it. My therapist makes me think about it constantly. About why I did it, what I was trying to prove, how I justified it to myself." He finally met her eyes. "I'm sorry. For whatever that's worth. I'm sorry for everything I did to you." Sloane studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity. She didn't find any. What she saw was someone who was genuinely miserable, someone who'd been broken down and was trying to figure out how to rebuild. "I accept your apology," she said, "but accepting it doesn't mean I trust you, or that we're friends now, or that everything is okay. It just means I acknowledge that you're taking responsibility for your actions. That's a start, but it's only a start." "I know." Bridger pushed his food around his tray without eating it. "Can I ask you something? That armbar you used on me in the cafeteria, you could have really hurt me. You could have broken my arm. Why didn't you?" "Because that's not who I want to be," Sloane said simply. "My father taught me martial arts, but he also taught me that violence should be a last resort, and that when it is necessary, you use the minimum force required. Hurting you worse than I needed to wouldn't have solved anything. It would have just made me like you." "I would have hurt you," Bridger admitted, "if I'd been able to. In the parking lot, I wanted to hurt you so badly. I wanted to make you feel the humiliation I felt. That's sick, isn't it? I was the one who started everything, but I was angry at you for defending yourself." "That's human," Sloane corrected. "Not good, but human. Most people don't handle being defeated well. You're not unique in that." They sat in silence for a moment. Around them the cafeteria buzzed with conversations, but no one approached their table. Everyone was watching, curious about what was happening but unwilling to get involved. "What happens now?" Bridger asked. "Do I just stay like this forever? The guy everyone avoids? The cautionary tale?" "That's up to you," Sloane said. "You can stay bitter and angry and keep defining yourself by your worst moments, or you can actually change, not just act differently because you're afraid of consequences, but actually become someone different, someone better." "How do I do that?" "I don't know. I'm not a therapist or a life coach, but I'd start by being genuinely kind to someone who doesn't expect it from you, not for credit or praise, just because it's the right thing to do. Then do it again and again. Eventually, maybe that becomes who you are instead of just something you're doing." Bridger nodded slowly, processing. "Thank you for talking to me. You didn't have to." "No, I didn't," Sloane agreed. She stood up. "But I wanted you to understand something. I don't hate you, Bridger. I don't think about you that much at all anymore. You don't have power over me, and you never will again. That's what real strength looks like. Not dominating people, but being free from the need to dominate or be dominated." She walked away, leaving him sitting alone. She didn't know if their conversation would make any difference. Maybe Bridger would change, maybe he wouldn't. That wasn't her responsibility. Her responsibility was to herself, to continue being the person her father had raised her to be, strong but not cruel, capable but not violent, confident but not arrogant. As Christmas break approached, Sloane found herself actually looking forward to returning to Lincoln in January. Callum had become her closest friend, someone she could trust completely. Their table in the cafeteria had expanded to include Darcy and several others, creating a small community of students who'd been on the margins but had found each other. Teachers acknowledged her now, not just as a name on a roster, but as a person. She walked the hallways without fear, without the constant vigilance that had exhausted her for months. On the last day before break, Callum caught up with her after final period. "Hey, so I wanted to ask you something." "Okay," Sloane said, curious at his nervous tone. "There's this art show downtown next week, student work from different schools. Some of my pieces are in it. Would you want to come with me? Like, as a date?" Sloane felt her heartbeat accelerate, but in a good way this time. She'd been developing feelings for Callum over the past few weeks, the way he made her laugh, his quiet strength, the genuine kindness he showed everyone, but she'd been too focused on survival to think about romance. "Yes," she said, smiling, "I'd like that." His face lit up. "Yeah? Okay, good, great. I'll text you the details." He started to walk away, then turned back. "By the way, I know I've said this before, but thank you. For everything. For standing up to Bridger, for showing me what courage actually looks like. You changed things here, not just for yourself, but for a lot of people." "We changed things," Sloane corrected. "You stood with me when it mattered." That took courage too. They went their separate ways, Sloane heading to her locker to collect her things for break. As she walked through the hallways one last time before vacation, she passed the spot where Bridger had first knocked her books out of her hands. She remembered how small she'd felt in that moment, how terrified and alone. She didn't feel small anymore. She felt exactly her size, strong enough to defend herself, confident enough to take up space, and wise enough to know that true strength wasn't about dominating others. It was about being free, being authentic, being unafraid to take up space in the world. In the parking lot, she saw a younger student, maybe a freshman, being hassled by a group of older students. They weren't being violent, just intimidating, making the kid uncomfortable. The same thing that had happened to her. She walked over. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice calm but carrying authority. The older students looked at her, recognition dawning on their faces. They knew who she was, knew her story. Without a word they dispersed, not willing to test whether she'd intervene on someone else's behalf. The freshman looked at her with grateful, relieved eyes. "Thank you." "Stand up straight," Sloane advised. "Look people in the eye. Don't make yourself small to make others comfortable. You have as much right to be here as anyone else." The kid nodded, straightening their shoulders experimentally. Sloane could see the moment when they decided to believe her, when they chose to take up space instead of shrinking. She walked to her car feeling something she hadn't felt since before her father died. Hope. Not naive hope that everything would be perfect, but realistic hope that she could handle whatever came next. She'd survived being targeted and isolated. She'd found the strength to stand up for herself without losing her humanity. She'd made real friends and become someone others looked to for guidance. More than that, she'd honored her father's true wish, not the letter of his dying request, but its spirit. He hadn't wanted her to be helpless. He'd wanted her not to become someone who used violence as a first resort, who let her skills make her arrogant or cruel. She'd defended herself when necessary, but she'd also shown mercy when she could have caused real harm. She'd proven to Bridger and everyone else that strength didn't require cruelty. As she drove home, the Colorado sun setting in her rearview mirror, Sloane thought about the girl she'd been in September. Terrified, isolated, hiding everything that made her strong. That girl was gone. In her place was someone who knew her own worth, who understood that being powerful didn't mean being aggressive, and who'd learned that the hardest thing about being strong wasn't defeating your enemies, it was choosing not to become like them. When school resumed in January, Sloane walked through the doors of Lincoln High School with her head high. The story of what had happened in the fall had become part of the school's lore, but she wasn't defined by it anymore. She was just Sloane, a student, a friend, someone who'd learned that you could be strong without being cruel, brave without being reckless, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was choose mercy over revenge. The cafeteria incident that everyone remembered, Bridger dumping food on her, had become a turning point not just for her, but for the entire school culture. In the weeks after the parking lot confrontation, the administration had finally implemented real anti-bullying measures, not because they'd suddenly found their conscience, but because parents and students had demanded change. There were consequences now for harassment. Teachers were required to report incidents. Students had anonymous ways to ask for help. It wasn't perfect. High school politics and cruelty didn't disappear overnight, but it was better. And every time Sloane saw a student standing up for themselves or witnessed someone intervening when they saw harassment, she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing she'd had a small part in creating that change. Her relationship with Callum deepened over the winter months. Their first date to the art show had been awkward and sweet, both of them nervous and unsure how to transition from friends to something more. But they figured it out gradually, naturally, building something genuine based on mutual respect and understanding. Callum understood her in ways others didn't. He'd been through his own version of what she'd experienced, and he never pushed her to be someone she wasn't. One Saturday in late January, they were at his house, sitting in his basement studio where he painted. She was doing homework while he worked on a new piece, comfortable in the silence punctuated by music from his speakers and the scratch of her pencil on paper. "Can I ask you something?" Callum said suddenly, putting down his brush. "Sure. Do you regret it? Breaking your promise to your father?" Sloane looked up from her calculus homework, considering the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I think about that moment in the cafeteria a lot. The moment when I could have kept taking it, could have walked away covered in food and humiliated, and I chose not to. Part of me wonders if there was another path, something I'm not seeing." "But," Callum prompted, sensing there was more, "but I also think my father would understand. The promise I made was based on his fear that I'd become violent and aggressive, that I'd use my skills to hurt people for no good reason. That's not what happened. I defended myself and my friend using the minimum force necessary. I showed mercy when I could have caused real harm. I think if he could see how it all played out, he'd be okay with it. Maybe even proud." "I think he would be too," Callum said quietly. "You handled something that would have broken most people, and you did it without becoming what you were fighting against. That takes real strength. In February, something unexpected happened. Bridger approached her in the hallway after school, his expression nervous. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just for a minute." Sloane glanced at Callum, who was waiting nearby. Callum nodded slightly. "Go ahead, I'll be right here." She followed Bridger to a quiet corner by the trophy cases that displayed Lincoln's athletic achievements. His name still featured on several football plaques from the previous season. "What is it?" she asked, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "I wanted you to know I've been doing the work," Bridger said. "The therapy, the reflection, all of it. And I wanted to tell you what I've figured out. You don't have to care, but I wanted to say it anyway." "Okay. I bullied you because you reminded me of everything I was afraid of being. You were new, alone, quiet, all the things I couldn't afford to be in my world. My dad has these impossible expectations. I have to be the best at everything, the strongest, the most respected. Any weakness is unacceptable." He swallowed hard. "When I saw you being okay with being quiet and alone, it threatened me. You weren't playing the game I'd been taught was the only way to survive, so I tried to punish you for it." "That's very self-aware," Sloane said carefully. "My therapist helped me see it. She's also helped me see that my father's expectations are toxic and that I've been hurting myself trying to meet them and hurting others in the process." He looked at her directly. "I know you don't forgive me. I know we'll never be friends, but I wanted you to know that I'm actually trying to change, not just acting like it to avoid consequences. I'm trying to be better." "Good," Sloane said. "Keep trying. Every day. That's all anyone can do." He nodded and walked away. Sloane stood there for a moment, thinking about transformation and second chances and the complexity of human beings. Bridger had been her tormentor, the source of months of misery. But he was also a teenager shaped by toxic influences, capable of growth if he chose it. Both things could be true simultaneously. As winter gave way to spring, the intensity of the fall semester faded into something more manageable. Sloane's story became just one of many stories in the daily life of Lincoln High School. New dramas emerged, new conflicts, new friendships. She was no longer the center of attention, which suited her perfectly. She and Callum spent most of their free time together now, along with Darcy and the small group that had formed around their cafeteria table. They had movie nights and study sessions and long conversations about everything and nothing. For the first time since moving to Colorado, Sloane felt like she had a real community, people who cared about her for herself, and not because she'd done something dramatic. She even started training again. Not at a formal gym. She wasn't ready for that yet, but in her apartment, working through drills and techniques in the small amount of space available. It felt good to reconnect with that part of herself, to honor her father's legacy in a way that didn't require hiding it. One evening in April, her mother found her drilling a sequence of movements in the living room. "You're training again," her mother observed. "Yeah." Sloane paused, breathing slightly elevated. "I realized I was honoring Dad's wish by not training, but I was also losing something important to me. I think there's a balance. I can keep my skills without becoming someone who looks for fights. It's just part of who I am." Her mother smiled. "He would agree. Your father never wanted you to be weak or helpless. He just didn't want you to become someone whose first instinct was violence. I think you've proven you're not that person." The school year moved toward its conclusion. Final exams approached. Students started thinking about summer plans and next year's schedules. The intensity of the fall felt distant now, like something that had happened to different people. On the last day of school, Sloane walked through Lincoln High School one final time before summer break. She passed the spot where Bridger had first bothered her, the corner where she'd hidden in the library, the cafeteria where everything had changed. Each location held memories now, painful ones certainly, but also proof of how far she'd come. At the lockers, she found a note taped to hers. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was clear. "Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. You made this place better." It was signed by a half-dozen students she barely knew, people who'd witnessed what happened and had taken something from it. She folded the note carefully and put it in her backpack. It wasn't about her being a hero or a fighter or anything dramatic. It was about the simple fact that one person standing up could make a difference, could give others permission to stand up too. That was the real lesson, the one that mattered more than any martial arts technique. Callum met her in the parking lot, where months ago she'd defended herself for the second time. Now it was just a parking lot again, full of students celebrating the end of the school year, making plans, laughing, normal, peaceful. "Ready for summer?" he asked, taking her hand. "More than ready." She smiled at him. "What do you want to do first?" "Everything." He grinned. "We have 3 months of freedom. We should do everything." As they walked toward his car, passing groups of celebrating students, Sloane felt something settle inside her, a sense of completion, of having survived something difficult and come out better for it. She'd arrived at Lincoln High School as someone small and scared, trying desperately to be invisible. She was leaving as someone confident, connected, and unafraid. More importantly, she'd learned the lesson her father had been trying to teach her all along. True strength wasn't about being able to hurt people, it was about being able to protect yourself without losing your humanity. It was about choosing mercy over revenge, understanding over hatred, growth over stagnation. The future was uncertain. Next year would bring new challenges, new obstacles, new conflicts to navigate. But Sloane knew now that she could handle whatever came. She'd faced her fears and discovered she was stronger than she'd believed, not because of her martial arts skills, but because of who she chose to be when tested. As Callum drove them away from Lincoln, the school shrinking in the side mirror, Sloane thought about the girl she'd been in September and smiled. That girl had been so sure that being small and quiet and invisible was the path to safety. She'd been wrong. Safety came from being fully yourself, from refusing to let others define you, from standing up when standing up mattered. And sometimes she'd learned the strongest thing you could do was not finish the fight. The cafeteria confrontation everyone remembered hadn't ended with her destroying Bridger, though she could have. It had ended with her showing restraint, demonstrating that she was powerful enough to defend herself, but wise enough to know when to stop. That restraint had been more devastating to Bridger's image than any violence could have been, and it had proven to everyone watching that she was better than her tormentor. Summer stretched ahead, full of possibility. Sloane Whitaker had survived her first year at Lincoln High School. More than survived. She'd transformed it, and herself, in the process. And as she looked forward to returning in the fall, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She was genuinely excited about what came next, because she knew now what she was capable of. Not just the physical skills her father had taught her, but the moral courage to use them wisely, the strength to show mercy, and the wisdom to understand that being powerful didn't mean being cruel. She'd learned that the hard way, through months of suffering and a series of moments where she'd had to choose who she wanted to be. She'd chosen well, and that choice had made all the difference.